This meeting of the SERVS Finance and Member Services Committee is now being recorded for record-keeping purposes. By participating in the session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. The meeting is now being live streamed. Thank you.
Good morning, all. This is the meeting of the Finance and Member Services Committee of the State Employees Retirement System of Pennsylvania. It is 9:05 a.m. on April 28th. I would like to call this meeting to order. Sarah, may we have a roll call, please? Am I on? Can people hear me?
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Senator DeSanto?
Here.
Oh, you're here? Okay, good.
Yeah, it's on mute too. I'm sorry.
All right, we're off to a great start
We're
here.
rolling here. Yep.
Chairman Philman?
Present.
Okay. Is there anybody from Representative Frankel on today, right now? Yeah.
They're not on right now, but I did get a message that Mr. Acco will be joining us at some point.
I am on.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, good. Thank you. Committee Chair Soderberg?
Here.
And then Secretary Vague or
Here.
his representative designee?
Here.
Was that Mr. Flanagan?
This is Richard Vegg.
Oh, Richard Vague. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So the first order of business is approval of the minutes from February 23rd and March 25th. A motion is in order to approve the minutes of February 23rd, 2021 and March 25th, 2021 Finance Member Services Committee meetings. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you. So we have no old business on the agenda for today, and all we do have is a very significant presentation by Korn Ferry. They're going to be doing a presentation on their 2020 actuarial valuation results and the fiscal year 2021-22 certification of the employer contribution rate. So today we have members of the Korn Ferry team, including Chris Seitz, Brent Mowry, and Craig Graby. So I will turn it over to them to begin their presentation. On board docs, there is a PowerPoint presentation and a backup memo as well.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I am Chris Seitz with Korn Ferry. You'll also be hearing from Craig Graby, and Brent Mowry has joined us and may say a hello somewhere in there as well. So today we are going to be reviewing the results of the December 31, 2020 actuarial valuation, and that sets the employer contributions beginning July 1, 2021, so the fiscal year 2021-2022 year. If we can move to the next slide. And we're going to spend most of the presentation going through some of the highlights and some of the key differences this year from the prior valuation. And then we will review the actual schedule of rates that the board will vote whether to approve the valuation and the rates that are proposed. And I do ask that if we could please get through the presentation first, and we'll address any questions after we've moved through all of the material. That will allow our team to be able to best reference any slide, whether it's a slide we had already covered or something from the end of the presentation. So if we can move forward a couple slides, please.
Excuse me, can you reference the page numbers that you're going to, just so I'm following along on
Yes,
the
absolutely.
Word docs?
Absolutely. So right now we are on page 4, and the purpose of the valuation is to review the experience from the CERS membership investments during calendar year 20, and to provide information on the funded status for CERS, so the relationship between the assets that are being held to the expected value of the future benefits that will be paid. And we, again, determine the contribution rates for fiscal year 2021-2022, so the rates that will begin July 1 of 2021. We also document the calculation of any applicable shared risk or shared gain adjustments. Right now, there is not currently any adjustment for the shared risk or shared gain provisions. And that will continue through June 30 of 2023. What we will do is, when we review the investment experience through December 31, 2022, so around this time in 2023, that's when we will make the next determination to determine if there is any adjustment beginning July 1, 2023. So we can move forward to page 5. So the employer contribution determination encompasses a few different things. First of all, we look at the member information as of December 31, 2020, and we look at the asset information as of December 31, 2020, but we utilize a actuarial value. And what that does is it smooths the market volatility that we see, so that we have a more stable contribution pattern and more stable funding results. Two things that are specific to this valuation are, first, we are reflecting changes in the assumptions that are used, so our expectations moving forward for both CERS members and the investment performance. And these changes were adopted by the board in July 2020 as a result of the comprehensive experience and assumption review that was completed. And also, this is the first valuation and that reflects the advance payment that was received from Pennsylvania State University, PSU. So we will also talk about how that affects the valuation. If we can move to slide 6. Slide 6 provides an overview of the changes in the actuarial assumptions that were adopted for this valuation. Again, this lists the major ones. This was a very robust analysis that we covered back in July. But again, for each major one, we've listed whether it overall creates an increase or a decrease in the employer contribution rates. And at the bottom, you will see the net overall effect was an increase in the employer contribution rates by about 1.3% of payroll, and an increase in the unfunded liability by about $1.3 billion. And this was in line with what we expected from the analysis that was completed and provided to the board in July. If we can move to slide 7. Slide 7 and 8 both contain a lot of information related to the advance payment that was received from Pennsylvania State University. Not going to directly cover it right now, but it is provided for background on what the nature of the agreement was. I'll highlight the bottom of this page 7 that, again, the $1.06 billion that was received from Penn State increased the December 31, 2020 funded ratio by about 1.9%, because that is money that is held now in CERS and is available to be invested and to pay benefits to all members of the plan. As part of this agreement, Penn State receives a reduction of the contributions that are due from them going into the future. So the current fiscal year that we're in, the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021, they are receiving a credit, so an offset from the amount due from Penn State of $93.3 million. And those annual offsets are set as part of the agreement, and there is a schedule of the offset that will be received during each fiscal year. And the agreement was designed such that there would be no expected effect on the contributions due from the other employers. So if we can move to page 8. So this represents an advance payment. So it has accelerated the funding of SERS. Again, SERS has received this additional contribution, but over time, SERS's funding will return to where expected to be in the future. Because again, it's an advance payment. The payment was received now and will be basically offset by these future reduced contributions that will come in from Penn State. In order to ensure that the payment received is allocated toward the contribution cost for Penn State and would not have an expected effect on any of the other employers' contributions, we have determined something called the amortization liability. And what that does is it looks at the unfunded liabilities, that shortfall between the total assets held, which include the advance payment, and the value of the benefits. That shortfall, that unfunded liability, is now much lower this year since the $1.06 billion advance payment was received. And what we do is we adjust that by the value of the remaining credits that Penn State will receive. So we have to say, okay, those additional credits will create an additional liability that is shared by all employers, since only one employer, Penn State, will be receiving those offsets to the required contributions. So when we determine the employer contribution rates, we will be basing that on this amortization liability, this adjusted value of the unfunded liability. If we can move forward to page 9. The investment performance during 2020 was strong. Obviously, this time last year it was a big question mark, and obviously we know that there is a lot of volatility. This chart shows the blue bars are the actual investment return for each year, for each calendar year, and the red line represents the expected return. So as we see, that has been very stable. There's obviously a lot of volatility in the markets. Luckily, the last few years, as you can see, 3 of the last 5 have been significantly above our expected return rate. And if we move to slide 10, again, the plan does utilize asset smoothing to help dampen that effect of that volatility. And the way that works is that the difference between what was actually earned on the investments and what we expected to earn is recognized over a 5-year period. So each year we measure the difference between the actual earnings and the expected investment performance, and then we smooth that over a 5-year period. As we move to slide 11, slide 11 shows the historical values of the market assets that are shown in red, and the actuarial value, this smooth value, in blue. And as you can see, it is much smoother. It is working exactly as intended, which is it takes out some of those peaks and valleys. The actuarial value obviously still reflects what's happening in the market, but it just dampens some of that effect. It takes out some of the peaks and valleys. The important thing to note this year is, as you can see, the market value is well in excess of the actuarial value. The actuarial value, so what's being used to determine the employer contribution rates, is about $32.7 billion. And the market value, so the actual amount being held in the trust, again, as of 12/31/2020, was just over $35 billion. So that difference of about $2.3 billion is unrecognized investment gains. So favorable investment performance above our expectations that have not yet been recognized. And they will be recognized again over the next 5 years to help, again, dampen the effect of any future changes in the investment performance. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Craig to discuss the results of the valuation.
Right. Thank you very much, Chris. If we can move to slide 12, please. All right, so this is some simple comparison of the summary member information from the last valuation being December 31, 2019 to the December 31, 2020 valuation. The change in the active population, it went down a little bit, and there's several reasons why that can happen. Is people retire or separate, and they're not replaced as quickly as they leave. There may be some members from certain employers who are electing TIA-CREF instead of the Surge Defined Benefit Plan. But overall, it was a 1.8% drop in the active population, and we normally see fluctuations year to year in that count. As a result, the average age and the average service both went up a little bit from last year to this year, and the average annual compensation went from $61,532 to $63,800, which is a 3.7% increase in the average compensation. Then the total compensation went up 1.8%, and then what we have is a funding payroll. And what this is the data snapshot as of December 31 of the salaries that we have for all employees, and we project it out to the upcoming fiscal year when the contributions are going to be made. So this includes adjustments for salary scale. So what we have is we had a change, a fairly dramatic change from the experience study in the salary scale. So what was projected to be the funding payroll last year, there's not a large increase in that overall funding payroll, where it goes from $6,657 million up to $6.7 billion, and that's mainly a result of the changes from the experience study to the salary scale. The retiree and beneficiary population, these are people currently in pay status, who might be just a service retirement, could be disability, could be a beneficiary of a member who's deceased. That population went up 0.5%, and that continues to grow, and we've seen that continue to grow, at a pace around that in recent years. And the average age, you have everybody aging 1 year who's a continuing annuitant in that group, and then you have some people leaving the population due to dying, and you have new entrants coming in as new retirees. So there's just a 0.3% increase, a 0.3-year increase in the average age of that population. The total benefit for the group went up 2.6%, and then if you look at the average of that entire group, that average increased 2.2%. So all in line with what we would expect year over year. Inactive invested participants are people who are due either a future benefit or maybe due a refund of contributions. So we account for their liability, and that population tends to fluctuate. It only changed by 1.5% this year, so that's again in line with expectations. If we could go to slide 13, please. All right, so here's the contribution results. So last year, the normal cost for the new entrant group, and this is the Act 5, Class A5, and Class A6 group, was at 1.67%. As a result of the experience study and the new population this year of new entrants, that has decreased to 1.5%, and that was in line with what we expected based on the experience study. The amortization liability went up a little bit, and we'll look at the reasons for that when we look at Schedule E shortly. And then this extra contribution to return Act 5 savings, that dropped from 0.66 down to 0.62, and this was part of Act 5 where the legislature said, any savings that we see, we're going to make an extra contribution into SERS to kind of increase the funding. So this is the third of kind of 3 years of that. Now that there's going to be a 10-year break because the projections didn't show any savings for the next 10 years after this contribution, and then it'll pick up again for another 10 years. So the 0.62, will be the last for 10 years, and then that extra contribution will kick in around 2031. The benefits completion plan, this is a 415M plan. It's a plan that the IRS allows for benefits to be paid that are in excess of the 415B limit. So this went up a little bit just because there's some older people in the group that are seeing substantial increases in their benefits due to the actual increase. So there's a potential for a large death benefit to be paid out, so we factor for that, and so we recommended an increase of 0.02% in that benefit completion plan cost. So overall, the total contribution rate went from 33.48 to 33.81. That's a 0.33% increase in the contribution. The funded status, we're showing it both on a market basis. I mean, Chris talked about the $2.3 billion difference between the market and the actuarial value of assets, and that's where you see this. On an actuarial value, you're 59.4% funded, but on a market basis, you're 63.6% funded. And good movement, from last year to this year, up almost 5% on a market basis, and up, about 3% on an actuarial basis. The improvement in the funded status of the plan. And Chris also talked about, the unfunded liability versus the amortization liability, and that difference being the outstanding present value of the outstanding balance of the set-off amounts. So this is set up in order to set a contribution for all employers that doesn't factor in Penn State's set-off schedule. So we're determining a cost for everyone in a sense as if Penn State didn't have those set-offs. And then after the fact, so Penn State will have a contribution rate comparable to everybody else's. And then after that, they get their reduction for the pre-funding that they made. So this is, was just an actuarial way of making sure that we're properly accounting for it, that we're determining the contribution for everyone as if Penn State did not have these set-off amounts, and then allowing Penn State to get its reduction after that. Slide 13, please. I'm sorry, slide 14, please. And this comes from Schedule E of our report, and this is an analysis of the gains and the losses. So what we have here is just a reconciliation of the normal costs and of the amortization liability percent from last year to this year, and showing the different reasons for the change. So this is what we would call a gain-loss analysis. There's a couple components in A and C under 2, and then down below there's kind of a corresponding liability impact for the change in the unfunded liability or change in the amortization liability. But A is a change in demographic assumptions, and C is the change in economic assumptions. These came out of the experience study and the board's decision to reduce the contribution or the interest rate from 7.125% down to 7% as of December 31, 2020. And these together have a pretty substantial impact on the overall cost. You can see that the normal cost decreased 0.36% as a result of the change in the demographic assumptions. The liability increased 1.15% for a net 0.79% increase in the cost. And in C, you see the change in the economic assumptions increased the normal cost 0.1%, increased the liability 0.44%, for an overall increase of 0.54%. With the investment return, last year was an excellent return. So 2019 and 2020 both were very good years for investment returns for the fund. So what we recognized during this year was an offset to any contribution increases of a minus 0.75%, and that's found in row B. And, again, that $2.3 billion difference between the actuarial value of assets and the market value of assets will be recognized over the next 4 years. So you'll continue to see some adjustments, downward overall over the next 4 years to the contributions as a result of those additional investments, the difference between the market and the actuarial value of assets. In line D, we have a 0.21% adjustment for pay increases that were different than expected, and there are some near-term collectively bargained increases that were a little higher than our salary scale, so we did expect there to be some minor differences in the short term, and that we did see that with just a 0.21% adjustment to the cost. And then the rest of it is just other, we kind of capture most everything else in row E, and that's just a 0.09%, and that's due to all other differences between actual and expected experience. The change in demographic of the new entrants is tied to a new entrant cohort that we look at to determine the normal cost. So that we just measure what last year's new entrant population was, and we compare it to what this year's new entrant population was, and that tends to have some change in the overall cost under the variant of entry age that we're currently using. Next year we'll be moving to a traditional entry age, so this will not be an item that will be part of that. It may be termed a little different, but it won't have the same type of impact that it currently has. Row G is simple fact that pay increases, but your amortization schedule is a fixed dollar amount. So if you have a fixed dollar amount and you now have a higher payroll a year later, you now have a lower percent of pay contribution to fund that fixed dollar amount. So as pay increases, you'll see some savings as a percent of pay, in the liability portion, or the amortization portion of the cost. So that's all that is. And then finally, the 0.66 extra contribution went down to 0.62, so that resulted in a reduction in the contribution of 0.04%. Down on the bottom of this table, again, these are the kind of the liabilities tied to each of the changes up above and the impact that it had on the unfunded liability. And in section 4A, the demographic assumptions, $700 million, and C, the change in the interest rate assumption is almost $600 million. So combined, we have $1.3 billion of the entire increase in the liability, and then that's offset in B by the investment earnings of $625 million, and then the other miscellaneous items below that is how you get from last year's unfunded / amortization liability to this year's amortization liability. So it's a lot of information. We'll move on to slide 15. We can come back to this if anybody has questions on it. This is just a simple graph to show you the employer contribution rates versus the normal costs, and you'll see that after the collar period that you had, the overall contribution rate has been fairly steady at the top there. That's the blue boxes. And then what you'll see is the red graph is the employer normal cost rate, and you'll see back from 2009 to 2010 a drop, and that was tied to Act 120 changes, and your new entrant cohort had a lower cost at that point. And then you'll see 2017 to 2018 another drop, and that's when Act 5 came into play. If we go to slide 16, please. This is just showing you the funded status of the plan, and it's been pretty steady, but it should start tracking up as you continue to make substantial contributions to pay off the unfunded liability. What is now 59.4% on this graph will trend higher and trend toward 100% over the next 20 to 30 years. The market value would be a little higher if we had graphed that at 63.6%, so that would be somewhere between the 60 and 70% in 2020. Then if you want to skip 2 slides to 18, this is going to be part of what the board will approve, and this is a set of contribution rates that are broken out by the different types of membership. So you'll have members that have age 60 normal retirement, you'll have members that have age 65, some that have 67, some that have 50, some that have 55. Because there's so many different types of members within the population, we set up a chart so that the employers look at what kind of member they have employed, and they make a contribution based on the type of benefit that member's accruing. And this, has the CSRS contribution, and it has the BCP contribution, and it allows you to get to the total contribution that and for the Act 5 members, we show separately what the defined contribution amount is. For A5 members, it's 2.25%. For A6 members, it's 2%, and for the DC only Class 40 members, it's 3.5%. But this just gives you an idea of what the different contribution rates are for all the different types of classes and categories of service that exist within CSRS. And then my last slide, slide 20, is just kind of looking ahead to, what you're going to approve, and there are board resolutions to approve the contribution rate, so that's something you'll be doing. And kind of the next meeting that we're going to have and be in front of you is going to be in June, where we'll be with Callan presenting an overview of the investment experience and kind of allowing the board to look at future expectations and make a decision on whether to maintain the 7% or whether to possibly go to something lower than 7%.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. Any questions from the members of the committee or from other members of the board that are attending? Okay.
Mary, this is Alan Flanagan. I just want to make a brief comment if possible.
Sure. Go ahead, Alan.
Thanks, Mary. One of the things that kind of strikes me as part of this process is, we're, looking at the employer contribution rate here in April, and then we're basing it off of the, capital market assumptions that we had for the asset allocation that we developed, some time ago, roughly about a year ago. And as everybody knows, it's been a pretty volatile year with a lot of kind of changing circumstances and certainly changes in terms of market rates and that sort of thing. And so, fairly shortly hereafter, I think Craig mentioned in June, we'll start looking to see whether we think, the asset allocations we currently have would continue to get us, 7%, or if there would need to be changes, to our asset allocation or to our rate of return assumption. And it would strike me that we're setting this funding rate, here in April, based on the assumption of 7%, but shortly hereafter, we may be changing that pretty, quickly, in which case we would then be having contributions coming in over the next year that would be at a rate that may potentially be different from the return assumption that we, adopt shortly hereafter. And so this isn't anything necessarily for today in terms of changing any actions, but something that I just wanted to raise, potentially something for the committee to consider in the future, whether it would make more sense to potentially, join up, some of this work related to the contribution rate in conjunction with some of the capital market assumption and asset allocation work that's so critical to, knowing whether or not we're actually setting these employer contribution rates at the right levels, particularly over the past year with everything that's been going on. It would seem, maybe, for example, we might be able to review some of the capital market assumptions in the January or February period, so that way they're a little bit less stale when we, review this information here at this point in time. It might kind of help make this an even more informed decision. Thanks.
Representative Schemmel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. This is really for my own information. So, have we had any of our consultants propose just sort of a schedule of adjusting those contribution or those rates down from 7%? Since historically it looks like we don't reach those, and I would say we don't want to be in a situation where we're going to sort of shock the budgetary process by suddenly having a significant decrease. So more for my information, those of you on the board longer would be able to fill me in.
Well, the 7% is a projection, and we actually just reduced that projection from last summer, and I'm trying to remember it. At one point, if you look at the chart that shows the actual rates of returns compared to what the projection was, were we at 8.5% maybe 20 years ago, or only 8%?
8.5, Mary.
8.5. So we have been bringing it down over the years to make it more in line and hopefully more realistic.
This is Dan Anko. Maybe it's actually a great question on how we've done in terms of actuarial rate of return, whether the 7%, whether we've hit it over the last year, over the last 3 and 5 years. I mean, I think that's a great question for staff. And, I think in terms of market conditions, it's possible that, it would be good to get that answer from staff or from Callan. I wouldn't necessarily assume that we've not reached that, actually in the last 3 to 5 to 7 years.
Good point.
If I could just add just a little bit of history, and Korn Ferry, you can jump in and assist me because you've been part of this process. So historically, a couple years ago, and I think this was before the committees were established, the assumed rate of return discussion was talked about in April as part of this process. And there was a lot of pressure to talk about this assumed rate because there's always the potential that it could be presented to have the rate stay the same or move and a decision not be made. And it's really imperative that the rates get set at this April meeting because our employers need to have them in place to update their payroll systems to take place July 1st. So just for example, as soon as these rates get approved, the governor's budget office or the Office of Administration is looking for me to send them to them right away so they can start implementing and testing. So we realized that was an issue when we thought, how could we handle this a little bit better? So we decided to separate the assumed rate of return discussion from the approval of the valuation completion and the approval of these rates. So we weren't setting the assumed rate in conjunction with the current valuation. We moved it to the summertime and we would discuss it and set the assumed rate of return that would be in place for the upcoming valuation. So set it in June of, let's say this year, 2021, and it would be effective with the valuation year, December 2021. And what would happen is if that assumed rate of return would change during June, we would have Korn Ferry work that into estimated rates, contribution rates that we would then provide to the budget office that they would use in their budgeting software and budgeting process. Just for instance, last year we gave them something very close to what we're providing in actual rates. We gave them a total of, I believe, 33.39, which is pretty close to what we're coming in at. But I do understand Alan's. I do understand Alan's point is maybe this was a first thought on how to solve this issue, but maybe there's a better point in time. It's just the April time period that we were using all throughout history just wasn't working. It was putting a lot of pressure on Korn Ferry and staff and our employers. So that was what was decided, I think, 3 years ago to change.
Correct. Yeah, about then.
So that's just a little bit of history on how this process has evolved.
Yeah. Yeah, Sarah is absolutely correct. This is something that we've really been working over the last few years just to get a timetable that works, that is smooth, and provides the necessary information in a timely fashion.
Yes, and this is Chris Seitz with Korn Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, from our perspective, it's a very robust process. If we do keep in mind that the valuation and including the assumed investment rate of return, it's a budgeting tool. So again, the purpose is not to directly predict investment performance in any given year or even any investment strategies. It is to design a contribution pattern that can be relatively stable and relatively predictable, but still adequately fund the benefits. Mm-hmm. So in order to, again, do that analysis and doing it in June, as Sarah explained, allows CSRS and to communicate with the employers any potential budget impacts, provide more accurate budget forecasting. Because if we were to be making a decision like that today, it would be rather late to try to communicate the impact on the budget, and would put a lot of pressure on which decision to make, because knowing that these are contribution rates that would be pretty much be getting loaded into payroll systems immediately and needing to see the impact of that. So again, we have found that the current timeline is very robust, and it would still, any changes in capital market expectations are long-term, and the effects would go in effect by that July 1 of 2022, which again can still adequately fund the plan. There would not be anything drastic enough of a difference to need to push that forward.
Okay, thank you. I had seen, you still have a comment or question?
I was just going to follow up briefly on that. So, I mean, that's very helpful background. My concern is just simply whether it would be beneficial to the process if that, investment assumption was, more timely aligned. Not suggesting any change in terms of this decision or the time of when we make the employer contribution rate decision, because I understand all the budgetary needs, that sort of thing as well. I did want to highlight just a couple other points as well, and again, not relevant to the decision today, but things that I think folks would want to be aware of. Between this, increase in the employer contribution rate, relative to, what our benefit payments are. I mean, we've currently, got a system, as everybody's aware, where we've got a negative cash flow rate of roughly 3%. And the growth in the benefit payments exceeds that in the growth of the contribution rate. So that would mean that our negative cash flow would continue to get larger. And again, I'm not challenging Korn Ferry's assumptions. I think that they're probably very well sound. There may be an adequate reason for why it makes sense for that deficit to be increasing based on demographics or whatever the case may be. But there are significant consequences, as we've been kind of educated on over the past year, in terms of what happens when you have negative cash flow. So, I mean, all these contributions that are coming in, we're not even investing them. They just go straight out to benefit payments. So, it exposes us, especially if there's a market drawdown, to continue to have to pay benefit payments out, by hitting the market and selling assets, potentially at low values, instead of, what you would ideally like to be in if we were better funded to, be a purchaser of assets at the bottom, to where we could get some of the types of returns on the recovery and asset values that we've seen over the past year. And that would make, a massive difference to our asset base and our funding levels over the long term. So just kind of raise that as points for folks to think about, because this decision, does have a significant consequence when we talk about things in terms of negative cash flow and how we're positioning the portfolio and things of that nature. Again, not relevant to the decision before us, but I think background that folks would want to keep in mind.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate your comments. Any other comments or questions?
Mary, I think somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, it's me.
Mr. Franco.
And I'm sorry, I came onto this late, and Dan is here also. I just want to, again, in terms of background and to amplify what Alan just said, I mean, it's not only, this is going to accelerate this imbalance in terms of what we take in and what we pay out, based on the new plan that new employees are coming in on. With respect to this hybrid plan. So money that was being contributed towards the defined benefit plan is now going to be siphoned off into the defined contribution plan. So as we turn over employees and new employees who are contributing to the plan, it's going to be less coming in as well. So I think it's going to accelerate the issue that Alan identified.
And a very another significant piece of it all is that we, of course, have more retirees than active members now. So that's a significant part of the puzzle as well. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's proceed. We've got an investment committee meeting coming up very shortly. So a motion is in order to recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board, A, approve the results of the December 31st, 2020 actuarial valuation, and for the Commonwealth fiscal years 2021-2022, certify the following contribution rates. 1. Shared risk contribution rate of 0%. 2. Employer normal cost contribution rate of 1.5%. 3. Composite employer contribution rate necessary for the funding of the system of 33.76%. And 4. Employer contribution rates by group and class of service of employees as set forth in the actuarial valuation as calculated by SERS Consulting Actuary, Korn Ferry, pursuant to Section 5508 of the State Employees Retirement Code. B, authorize SERS staff and Korn Ferry to use such rates to develop all the employer rates for the period of July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2022, pursuant to Sections 5902K of the State Employees Retirement Code. C, establish an employer contribution rate of 0.05% for the fiscal year 2021-2022 to fund the benefits completion plan established pursuant to Section 5941 of the State Employees Retirement Code. And D, authorize SERS Executive Director to certify such rates to all employers with employees who are active members of SERS and to the Secretary of the Budget. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Sarah, would you do a roll call?
Yes. Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Chairman Philman,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Aye.
Committee Chair Soderberg,
Aye.
and Secretary Vague.
Aye.
Okay. 5 yeses.
Okay. The vote is unanimous. The motion carries. For new business, we have no new business. There are some informational items on membership and benefit lists that have been posted for your information. Before we adjourn, are there any comments, concerns, or questions to bring up? All right, seeing none, a motion is in order to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.